Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, season 06, episode 20. For much of the 19th century, the state in Britain did very little to organize society, leaving individuals to largely fend for themselves. But how did this deeply entrenched philosophy of self-help begin to yield to the burgeoning idea of state responsibility, laying the groundwork for the welfare state? Today, we're taking a deep dive into that fascinating and often surprising shift in British society. We'll trace the path from rugged individualism, to the first tentative steps toward a state responsibility, leading us right up to 1939. You've provided us with some truly eye-opening material, and our mission today is to extract the key arguments, the shocking realities, and the political struggles that shaped this massive transformation.
Absolutely. What's particularly striking about this period is just how deeply ingrained the idea of self-help was. It was almost a moral virtue, if you will, and it was incredibly challenging to even begin to question that. So we're going to unpack the forces that slowly but surely chipped away at that traditional view, revealing a profound shift in thinking about who was truly responsible for the well-being of the people.
Okay, let's set the scene then. What did it really mean for the state to do very little for society back in the 19th century? What was the practical reality?
Well, for the vast majority of the 19th century, the British government largely kept its distance, minimal role.
Right.
While there was some cash for education and acts to improve it, plus regulations for health and working conditions, key areas like economic planning or direct help for the poor outside of the dreaded workhouses were largely untouched.
Untouched. And this was rooted in...
Laissez-faire. The belief that government interference should be minimal, just let the market and individuals sort things out.
And central to this hands-off approach was that powerful idea of self-help. What exactly did that mean for the average person, and who was championing it?
Well, at its core, self-help was seen as the supreme Victorian virtue. The prevailing belief was, if you had complete freedom, everyone had an equal shot at success.
Equal chance.
That was the idea. And hard work would always bring its own rewards. Samuel Smiles, a very influential figure, famously articulated this in his 1859 book.
Ah, yes. Smiles.
He wrote, "Heaven helps them who help themselves." He argued that even the best institutions merely provided the freedom for individuals to, well, improve their own condition. And frankly, Victorian Britain did have many examples of men who, through sheer determination, rose from very humble beginnings.
So this philosophy had real implications.
Oh, absolutely. Smiles, for instance, saw no need for unemployment benefits. He believed workers should save for hard times during periods of prosperity.
Just save up.
Exactly. And this wasn't just theory. We saw it in action with the explosion of friendly societies. These were essentially worker-run insurance schemes.
Right. Worker.
Offering benefits for sickness, unemployment, even small old-age pensions. And by 1900, it's quite remarkable, roughly 90% of the population had some form of this self-help insurance protection through these societies.
90%. That's huge for a voluntary system. But this whole self-help model inevitably raised a critical question. If the state were to step in, who'd foot the bill?
Exactly. Cost was a massive barrier. State-provided benefits meant increased taxation, hugely unpopular with voters.
Always is.
And if the money came from local authorities, higher local rates, another sure vote loser. I mean, look at the Poor Law of 1834. A key motivation there had been to reduce those local rates.
Right, reduce costs.
And for a liberal government, tariffs on imports were simply out of the question. That staunch commitment to free trade, you see.
So, okay, if personal success hinged entirely on self-help, what did that imply about poverty? Why were people poor, according to this view?
Well, if success was a result of self-help, then poverty, by this logic, was seen as a personal failing.
A character flaw.
Pretty much. Attributed to character defect, things like laziness, drunkenness, gambling, or simply an inability to cope. This harsh perspective was absolutely central to the new poor law system. Conditions in the workhouses were deliberately made unattractive, even worse than the life of the poorest laborer outside.
That principle of, what was it?
Less eligibility. Designed specifically to discourage anyone from seeing the workhouse as a refuge, to push them, instead, to find any work available, however bad. And the fear was, that state aid would just destroy the working class's initiative. They'd become helpless, always expecting the state to provide.
So individualism was the answer.
Championed is the best way. To encourage hard work, moral living, saving. That was the philosophy.
It sounds like a really deeply entrenched, almost moralistic view. But as the 19th century turned into the 20th, this conventional wisdom really started to face challenges. Where did those cracks in the self-help theory begin to show?
Well, the late 19th century, often called the Great Depression in Britain, brought widespread unemployment, particularly severe around 1904-1905.
A critical point.
Yes, a critical breaking point for the self-help theory. It became painfully obvious that no matter how hard a person tried, sometimes there were simply no jobs to be found. The freedom people truly yearned for wasn't just freedom to act, but freedom from unemployment, freedom from poverty.
A different kind of freedom.
Exactly. And in this new reality, the poor law was clearly completely inadequate. The population was growing rapidly. Remember, under 30 million in 1881 to 37 million by 1901.
It's a huge growth.
And with it, the number of paupers grew, straining local resources, those local rates again. Workhouses were still viewed with fear, suspicion. Inmates often treated almost like criminals. Many families would endure near starvation rather than enter those places.
So charity wasn't enough.
Well, charity was extensive. Churches, countless organizations, but it just couldn't cope systematically with the scale of the problem. Plus, it often felt incredibly degrading. A handout, not a right.
Right. This is where things really took a turn, isn't it? You mentioned shocking truths about poverty. What specific revelations really forced people to look at the old ideas differently?
Well, poverty gained unprecedented public attention then, fueled by a couple of key things. The Boer War, 1899 to 1902, highlighted a stark reality.
How so?
Almost half the volunteers for the Army were found to be physically unfit for service. Half.
Wow.
That immediately convinced many that government action was vital, not just for social welfare, but for national defense. There was even a link made to social Darwinism, the idea that societies compete, only the fittest survive. You needed a strong, healthy population.
National fitness became a concern.
Absolutely. But the real bombshells came from social surveys. Charles Booth, a Liverpool shipowner, but with a strong social conscience. He conducted this meticulous study between 1886 and 1903. His findings for London were staggering. Over 30% of the city's population lived in serious poverty.
30%.
And for the elderly, it might have been as high as 45%. Crucially, Booth showed that poverty was often due to external factors, unemployment, illness, not individual fault. This study, more than anything else really, exploded that entrenched Victorian myth that poverty was always down to laziness or character defect.
Exploded the myth, and Booth wasn't alone.
No. In 1901, Seebohm Rowntree, a Quaker from a prominent manufacturing family in York, replicated Booth's study in his hometown.
In York?
Yes. He found 28% living in serious poverty there, and he chillingly concluded from 25 to 30% of the town population of the United Kingdom are living in poverty. Even more startling, he discovered that wages were often so low that even fully employed men lived on the brink of starvation.
Even if they had a job.
Exactly. This hard statistical evidence from Booth and Rowntree was absolutely vital, undeniable proof. It hugely bolstered the case for state intervention, to help the deserving poor at least.
So if these revelations showed nearly a third of the population needed help, what were the proposed solutions? What did people start suggesting the state should do?
The conclusion became increasingly unavoidable. Only the state possessed the necessary resources and power. Charles Booth, for instance, suggested a modest old age pension, 5 shillings a week for those over 65.
Okay.
And he proposed the state should directly care for the poorest 10%, the incapable, as he called them. He even cautiously described this as limited socialism, arguing it would help them find work and prevent further socialistic interference.
Interesting phrasing.
Seebohm Rowntree, perhaps less radically, proposed a minimum wage. On the other end of the spectrum, you had socialist groups advocating for collective ownership.
Nationalization.
Essentially, yes. Nationalization of land, mines, industries, the means of production, to spread wealth fairly and eliminate poverty altogether.
Radical ideas were definitely on the table.
Which raises an important point. With such radical ideas floating around, what was the immediate, perhaps more pragmatic motive for the state to finally act?
The fear of socialism. You're suggesting some reforms were actually introduced to prevent something more drastic taking hold?
Precisely. With more working-class men getting the vote, 1867, 1884, there was a genuine concern they'd be drawn to socialist ideas if the mainstream parties didn't address poverty.
Makes sense politically.
Moderate social reform was increasingly seen as a strategic move, improve conditions, turn workers away from socialism, preserve the capitalist system. Some even hoped it would, kill off the Infant Labor Party, formed in 1900.
It's worth remembering, Bismarck in Germany used very similar reasoning in the 1880s when he brought in state pensions. trying to curb socialism there, too.
Okay, so before the Liberals really got going, the conservative government under Arthur Balfour made a couple of initial moves, but they seemed to fall short. What happened there?
Balfour's government made two notable, though limited, moves. First, the Unemployed Workmen Act of 1905. It allowed local committees to organize work using voluntary donations.
Voluntary donations.
Which was the problem. It largely failed because it lacked crucial state financing. More significantly, they set up the Royal Commission on the Poor Laws in 1905.
Right, with Booth and Beatrice Webb. It's exactly. Tasked with investigating the poor law's shortcomings and proposing improvements. But the commission quickly became a battleground of ideas. Individualism versus collectivism still raging.
So they disagreed?
Fundamentally. The Minority Report, championed by Beatrice Webb, forcefully argued poverty was an economic and national problem needing state intervention.
Yeah.
The Majority Report, however, maintained the causes of distress were largely moral, still basically a person's own fault if they were poor. These disagreements dragged on. The reports weren't even published until 1909.
By which time the Liberals were already acting.
Exactly. The Liberals had already embarked on their own path of reform.
So the Liberals finally sweep into power in late 1905. Why did they become the government to introduce these truly systematic social reforms starting in 1906? What finally pushed them?
Well, the Liberals were indeed the first government to systematically tackle poverty beyond just the workhouse. But it's important to remember, they didn't arrive with some grand master plan.
No blueprint.
No. Each reform was often a response to a specific problem, driven by a mix of motives. A key factor was the emergence of new liberalism, a left-wing faction, influenced by economists like J. A. Hobson. They broke from traditional liberalism, accepted the need for state intervention for these nationwide social problems.
So a shift within liberalism itself.
Yes, and there was also a strong moral imperative. Many liberals just felt it was wrong, indefensible for a third of the population to live in such misery amidst national prosperity. Statistics showed half the national income going to just 1/9 of the population.
There's huge inequality.
But perhaps a more immediately compelling motive was national efficiency. That shock over the poor physical condition of Boer War recruits lingered.
Right, the fitness issue.
A healthy, robust population was suddenly seen as vital for military defense, for a productive workforce. The Committee on Physical Deterioration in 1904 explicitly suggested school meals, medical inspections. The Birmingham Chamber of Commerce even called for health insurance for efficiency.
So it became about national survival.
In a way, yes. National survival was the phrase used, and political pressure was immense. 30 Labor MPs elected in 1906, many Liberal MPs from trade unions. Demands grew louder.
Like school meals, pensions.
Exactly. And when Liberals started losing by-elections to Labor, they quickly realized that targeted social reforms could attract voters away from socialism. Steal Labor's thunder, as Lloyd George himself noted, to stop this electoral rot.
Pragmatic politics.
Very much so. Also remember, some conservatives had wanted free school meals, but Balfour refused over cost. This gave the Liberals an opening to offer something distinct. And finally, don't underestimate ambition. Figures like Lloyd George and Churchill behind most of these reforms. Yes, they genuinely wanted to help the poor, but they also saw a chance to make a great stir, advance their careers.
A fascinating mix of motives, then. Idealism, national interest, political calculation. So what were these breakthrough liberal reforms, and how much did they genuinely move Britain towards a welfare state?
Well, they started with strengthening trade unions. The 1906 Trade Disputes Act protected funds, allowed peaceful picketing. But the major strides were in social welfare.
Okay.
For children, they introduced what became known as the Children's Charter. This was between 1906 and 1908. It included powers for local authorities to provide free school meals for needy children from '06, made compulsory by 1914. Compulsory medical inspections in schools from '07.
Medical inspections, too.
Yes, with government grants for treatment coming later, leading to school clinics. Child offenders, tried in special juvenile courts, sent to Borstals, not adult prisons. Probation officers for aftercare.
A different approach to youth justice.
And stiff penalties for child ill treatment. Plus, they started the free place system in secondary schools, reserving a quarter of places for elementary school kids via scholarships.
So if I'm looking for the aha moment here, what's the single biggest change these children's reforms signal? Why was this children's charter so significant for the average family?
It was profoundly significant because it was the first time a government had intervened so directly in ordinary people's lives, providing help, not as charity, like the poor law.
Not charity, but
as a right, a fundamental service. The state was, for the first time, explicitly beginning to admit its responsibility to look after the poor and vulnerable. A huge shift in principle.
Acknowledging responsibility. Okay, what else?
Then came the landmark Old Age Pensions Act of 1908. Truly groundbreaking. A non-contributory pension paid from general taxation via post offices.
Non-contributory, paid by the state.
5 shillings a week for those over 70. Though there were income restrictions, exclusions for minor offenses, despite labor complaining it was too little, too late. Immensely popular.
I bet.
But it did create a slightly strange dual system, operating alongside the old poor law, which still applied if you didn't qualify.
Right, the dual system. And for workers.
Important measures there, too. The Workmen's Compensation Act, 1906, extended injury compensation to almost all workers. The Merchant Shipping Act, 1906, set new rules for cruise food and accommodation. The Mines Act, 1908, introduced an 8-hour day for miners, a huge milestone. First time the government regulated adult male working hours.
A big step.
Labor exchanges set up in 1909 by Churchill and William Beveridge. That was a key idea from Beatrice Webb's Minority Report, helping the unemployed find jobs. And the Trade Boards Act, 1909, another Churchill initiative, fixed minimum wages in those notorious sweated industries like tailoring, lace making, moving towards Rowntree's idea, protecting nearly 400,000 workers by 1913.
Tackling the worst exploitation.
But arguably the most pivotal measure was Lloyd George's National Insurance Act of 1911. This was compulsory and contributory.
Ah, contributory, that's key.
Yes, covering health and unemployment insurance. Workers, employers, the state all paid in. Health insurance provided sick pay, free medical attention, though, importantly, not for workers' families.
Only the worker.
Only the worker. Unemployment insurance covered specific trades like building, shipbuilding, provided benefit for a maximum of 15 weeks.
Now, this one was quite controversial precisely because it was contributory, unlike the pensions.
Precisely. Labor wanted it non-contributory, paid for by higher taxes on the wealthy. Conservatives opposed forcing payments directly from wages, even doctors. Friendly societies, private insurance companies resisted, feared losing independence or business.
Lots of opposition.
Lloyd George, though, was a master negotiator. He got it through by having approved societies, often the very insurance companies that resisted, administer the scheme under state supervision. It was intended as an experimental start, meant for extension.
Yep.
But then World War I intervened. Still, a massive extension of state aid, and it firmly established the principle that these schemes should be contributory.
Okay, and housing.
Finally, yes, the Housing and Town Planning Act of 1910 introduced compulsory slum clearance, gave councils power to build houses, but lack of central government funding meant very few new council houses were actually built before the war.
Limited impact there initially. Looking back at all these reforms then, how successful were they overall? How far had Britain truly moved towards a comprehensive welfare state by 1914?
Well, collectively, they certainly relieved some of the worst poverty, no doubt. But by 1914, many areas were still untouched. That unsatisfactory dual system with the poor law remained right up until 1929.
Still there.
Trade unions weren't entirely impressed either, showed their dissatisfaction with increasing militancy, 1910-14. And that disturbing fact, the percentage of Army volunteers rejected as unfit in 1914 was still almost as high as in 1900.
Still a major problem.
So it's easy in hindsight to criticize the liberals for being cautious, but they faced determined opposition, even from within their own party. Given the power of individualism and self-help ideas, they deserve immense credit for how far they did go. The vitally important point is they laid critical foundations. Historians naturally differ on the overall progress. Joe Greenman, a liberal leader, argued they basically created the welfare state in principle.
Establish the basics.
Arthur Marwick believed the full welfare state didn't emerge until after World War II. Donald Reed offered a good compromise. The liberals achieved the beginnings of a social service state.
Social service state, meaning?
Meaning a state ensuring certain minimum standards rather than a full welfare state providing the best possible services for everybody. That distinction, I think, is key to understanding the journey.
That distinction is crucial. Okay, let's fast forward into the interwar period. What impact did the First World War itself have on the state's role, and critically, on this idea of collectivism?
Well, the war dramatically forced the government to abandon laissez-faire on an unprecedented scale, just to fight more efficiently.
A total war effort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Coal mines, shipping, factories, wages, prices, rationing the government-controlled and directed national life in a way unthinkable before 1914. While most of this direct control was abandoned post-war, people had become accustomed to state intervention. There was widespread talk of post-war reconstruction, homes fit for heroes.
Homes fit for heroes, right.
Which implicitly spread the idea that working-class people deserve tangible rewards for their immense sacrifices. So, state collectivism, born of wartime necessity, was much more widely accepted afterwards.
Hmm. But despite this new acceptance, the interwar period faced huge economic challenges, didn't it? How did those problems limit further state action and shape policy?
Oh, immensely. A severe economic slump hit Britain at the start of 1921. Threw about 2 million people out of work by the end of the year.
2 million.
This had a double impact. It reduced government tax revenue and massively increased the cost of unemployment benefits. Less money for other things like education, health.
A vicious cycle.
And Britain also faced that slow, permanent economic decline. Structural unemployment in older industries, coal, textiles, shipbuilding, iron, steel, particularly bad in Scotland, Wales, northern England. These industries struggled with foreign competition, lack of modernization. Then the 1929 Wall Street crash and the world economic crisis made everything worse. Unemployment hit almost 3 million by 32-33.
3 million.
Governments were constantly wrestling with how to finance benefits without raising taxes. Led to things like pressuring local authorities to pay more and, controversially, implementing means-tested benefits.
The means test. That caused resentment.
Significant resentment, yes, where a household's total income and assets were scrutinized. Thrifty families, or those with working members, could be denied help. Very unpopular.
Understood. But even with these huge challenges, there were significant developments in social policy, particularly around unemployment. What were the key steps taken?
Indeed, there were crucial advancements, often driven by the sheer scale of the problem. Right at the end of WWI, the out-of-work donation, OWD, in 1918, a non-contributory payment, calculated by family size, set a vital precedent for family provision.
Family size included.
Then the Unemployment Insurance Act, 1920, greatly expanded Lloyd George's 1911 scheme, covered most workers, and critically, by 1921, introduced extra allowances for a man's wife and family. Nearly two-thirds of the labor force now insured.
Broader coverage.
But a major shift occurred in 1921. Lloyd George's government extended benefits beyond the insured period. Call them uncovenanted benefits, or more commonly, the dole. These were means-tested. This marked a new principle. Unemployment benefit was no longer just insurance. It had become, in many cases, long-term state maintenance.
State maintenance. A big change.
The first Labor government in 24 removed the gap between benefit periods, and Neville Chamberlain's Unemployment Insurance Act, 1927, further abolished distinctions, allowed benefits for an unlimited period, provided you were genuinely seeking work. Even conservatives accepting long-term state maintenance by then.
Acceptance across the board.
And perhaps most importantly, the conservatives, again under Neville Chamberlain, finally brought about the end of the Poor Law in 1929-30.
It's finally gone.
That notorious system, viewed with such intense loathing, abolished outright. Local authorities, with government grants, took over responsibility through new public assistance committees, PACIs. Buildings might have been the same, but the old stigma slowly began to change. Later, the Unemployment Act of 1934 introduced the Unemployment Assistance Board, UAB, taking over means-tested assistance from the PACIs. That hated less eligibility principle finally vanished, though the means test itself remained controversial.
But the principle was gone.
By 1936, even agricultural workers were insured for the first time. So, all in all, provision for the unemployed was arguably the most successful interwar welfare policy. Haphazard maybe, but it saved the country from potential revolution, got rid of the Poor Law, and established state responsibility for transitional benefits.
Okay, so unemployment saw significant, albeit messy, progress. What about housing, education, health, pensions? How did those areas fare?
Right. Housing. High hopes with homes fit for heroes. The Addison Housing Act, 1919, established the principle. Housing is a state responsibility. Led to over 213,000 new houses, but abandoned in 22 due to cuts.
Economic cuts again?
Later, labor initiatives.
Yeah.
The Wheatley Housing Act, 1924, and Greenwood Housing Act, 1930, provided grants, subsidies for council houses, slum clearance. By 1939, over 1 million new council houses were built.
1 million is significant.
Definitely improved conditions for many, but overcrowding and slums stubbornly persisted. Only a fraction of new houses were built specifically to relieve overcrowding.
So progress, but incomplete. Education.
Education. H.A.L. Fisher's Education Act, 1918, aimed high compulsory education to 14, more free secondary places. But economy drives from 21 limited its full implementation. The Important Hatter Report, 1926, recommended the 11-plus break, leaving age 15, creating grammar and modern schools.
The basis of the later system.
Yes, but these recommendations saw very little action by 1939. Again, largely economic difficulties holding things back.
And pension.
Pensions. The 1908 non-contributory pension was increased in 1919. More significantly, The Widows, Orphans, and Old Age Contributory Pensions Act, 1925. A new compulsory insurance scheme. Pensions from 65, payments for widows, children, orphans.
Another contributory scheme?
Yes, an extension. But labor criticized making workers pay directly. And the system remained unnecessarily complicated, running alongside the older 1908 scheme.
Still complex. What about health?
Health insurance was arguably the most disappointing area. No major changes from the 1911 provision. Recommendations to extend coverage to workers' families, pool resources, actively resisted by powerful insurance companies,
Vested interests.
leaving the system largely unchanged until after WWII. Key criticisms persisted. No provision for families, no payment for hospital treatment, too few local authority hospitals.
So health really lagged behind. It sounds like despite the post-war talk and some advances, particularly unemployment relief, that dream of a fully planned economy or a comprehensive welfare state still eluded Britain by 1939. Why wasn't more done?
That's right. The persistent high unemployment, never below 1 million between the wars, made many feel something was fundamentally broken. This led to various compelling ideas for a planned economy.
Like Keynes.
Exactly. The Liberals, guided by John Maynard Keynes, proposed massive government spending $250 million on public works, roads, houses, electricity, to create jobs, stimulate the economy, spending your way out of a depression. Even conservatives like Harold Macmillan suggested public works. The Political and Economic Planning, PPEP group, advocated comprehensive national planning. Sir Oswald Mosley's Mosley Memorandum in 1930 had radical ideas: import restrictions, farm subsidies, lowering the pension age.
Mosey had economic ideas too, then.
Oh yes, before his later political path. And the Labour Party, increasingly influenced by Keynes, also advocated nationalization of key industries to eliminate slumps.
Lots of ideas floating around.
But successive governments largely ignored this advice. Some piecemeal actions were taken by the national governments, after 31 abandoning free trade in 32, the Special Areas Act 34 to revive depressed regions, boosting steel and shipbuilding, helped by rearmament from 36. But no long-term strategy for comprehensive economic planning emerged by 1939.
Why not? What were the main blockers?
Well, several things. Firstly, no clear political majority for these ambitious ideas, even with some cross-party support. Secondly, a majority of MPs across all parties were still stubbornly convinced mass unemployment was simply incurable.
Incurable.
That was the prevailing view for many. So their focus was just on making unemployment insurance effective. And thirdly, cost. All these proposals were expensive. Leading politicians, the Bank of England, the Treasury, extremely cautious, prioritizing low government spending, balancing the budget during a depression. Keynes's spend-your-way-out ideas seemed far too risky to them.
Financial orthodoxy won out. So given all this, what was the overall state of the British people by 1939, especially considering different classes and regions?
It's a mixed picture. Living standards generally improved for industrial workers. Average real wages up, diets better, less alcohol. But agricultural laborers suffered significantly. Falling wheat prices, land decline, often forced to move to cities.
A rural decline.
Yes. But a striking indicator of working-class self-reliance, even improvement, was the continued growth of friendly societies. Membership exploded. By 1911, at least half the male labor force belonged. Highly praised self-help organizations.
Self-help's still strong then.
In certain ways, yes. However, serious health concerns persisted. Overall death rates fell, but the infant death rate actually rose during the 1890s. Infections, disease spread in schools. Typhus, cholera largely eliminated thanks to public health acts. Clean water. Smallpox nearly conquered by vaccination.
Yeah.
But huge disparities were made.
Between classes.
Definitely. The infant death rate was still twice as high among the working class compared to the better off. Unhealthy housing directly contributed to premature deaths, especially from tuberculosis, still the main killer of adults in 1900. And Seebohm Rowntree's follow-up survey in York, published in 1941, reflecting the late 30s, found that despite improvements, over 30% of workers in a typical city still had incomes too low for basic subsistence. Almost half of working-class children spent their first 5 years in poverty.
Still significant poverty by 1939.
Absolutely. So, by 1939, despite all the changes, Britain still lacked a truly comprehensive, generally planned social policy or economy.
What an incredible journey through a truly pivotal period. From a society clinging to that belief in individual responsibility to a grudging piecemeal acceptance that the state had a critical role. We've seen how the shocking realities of poverty, the pressures of national efficiency, even that pragmatic fear of radicalism slowly chipped away at the old order.
Exactly. And if you connect it to the bigger picture, The path to the welfare state wasn't some neat blueprint. It was a series of responses, often driven by crisis, by compromise. While the full welfare state wouldn't arrive until after World War II, the liberals, and later the interwar governments, laid crucial foundations. They fundamentally moved Britain from just ensuring minimum standards towards tentatively accepting broader, more direct responsibility for health, housing, unemployment.
So what does this all mean for you listening? As we reflect on this period of profound transformation where the very definition of societal responsibility was being rewritten, it really raises an important question for today, doesn't it? In our own complex times, how do we navigate that balance between individual agency and collective responsibility? And what enduring lessons can we draw from Britain's early, often reluctant steps towards a state that increasingly aimed to look after its people? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.